Thank you, Cathaoirleach, and I want to thank the House for the opportunity to speak on the Health Bill 2021. If I could maybe just start by reflecting on the fact that Government this week took the decision to extend very significant restrictions, and this was not a decision that we took lightly, but reflecting on a number that many deputies have mentioned today, 4,237. That is the number of people who have died because of COVID-19, and everything that we are doing is to try and keep that number as low as possible. But our schools are beginning to reopen, and we will review the current level of restrictions again in April. It is our firm hope that we will be in a position to ease and to relax some of these regulations, but we would ask people to continue to abide by the restrictions until we get to that point. I know that we are asking a huge amount of people, and that public rightly expects that government will keep to our side of the bargain in protecting us against the state or against COVID-19, while also looking beyond the pandemic. In that sense, I very much appreciate that many people, many deputies, senators have wished to see legislation passed in order to allow for mandatory quarantine in designated facilities. However, I do believe that it is important that this is done with the utmost care and the utmost attention to detail. A year ago, it would have been almost inconceivable that we would be in a position where there would be penal regulations in place to bar people travelling to airports or ports, or that we would seek to place individuals entering our country into a mandatory quarantine system. It is absolutely essential that we remember what an extraordinary step this is, and the legislative basis for doing so is rooted in public health grounds. That is firmly the basis of this bill. The public health advice is clear: everybody should avoid non-essential travel completely. The legislation being taken by my colleague Minister Donnelly, and I want to sincerely thank him and all of his colleagues in health for the work that they are doing and that they will continue to do to keep us safe throughout this pandemic. Officials in my department have worked closely with their colleagues in the Department of Health in the drafting of this bill, and we will continue to provide support and assistance. There is ongoing cooperation between our departments and more generally across all of government as we continue to deal with the unprecedented challenges presented by COVID-19. The extraordinary nature of the battle against the COVID-19 and efforts of all of us in this House to keep the public safe, I believe, are reflected in the extraordinary measures contained in this bill. Although we are introducing mandatory quarantine to protect public health, we must strongly consider the civil rights and liberties of those we are asking to quarantine as we take this step and as we consider how we put these measures into operation. And we have had to do that with every single measure that we have introduced in the last year at every step of the way. As they have throughout the pandemic, and Garda Síochána are continuing to support public health regulations through a graduated response and in keeping with our country's long history of policing by consent. This approach has seen Gardaí use the 4 E's approach: to engage, to educate, to encourage, and only as a last resort to enforce. As many deputies will be aware, Gardaí are implementing a system of fixed charge notice for those found in breach of COVID-19 regulations, which have been designated as penal provisions. This system allows for a speedier system of fines without the requirement for a person to be brought before the court and prosecuted. Over 9,000 such fines have been issued to date, including over 300 of the €500 fines for non-essential travel to ports or airports, and that's unfortunately only in the last 2 to 3 weeks. I would urge people who are thinking of travelling where there is absolutely no need for them to do so, not to do so. Many of the people who are leaving our country, or indeed coming back into our country, they are Irish citizens, they are resident here, they are working here, so I would urge them not to travel. We've introduced mandatory PCR testing for every person who is entering this state. We have introduced mandatory quarantining for every person who is entering into this state, and we are now introducing mandatory hotel quarantine for those coming from at-risk countries, obviously where the Minister has an opportunity to extend that list, but also those who have no PCR test. We are the first country in the EU to introduce this type of hotel quarantine. It's important to note that those who are serving their period of mandatory quarantine have committed no crime. It would therefore not be appropriate for members of Garda Síochána to provide a permanent presence at such locations. However, where issues arise, where there are public order incidents or attempts to breach the regulations which are in place for public safety, my department and Garda Síochána will of course provide assistance. I would also like to reassure the House that there is ongoing cooperation between Garda Síochána and the Government on COVID measures and other issues. Officials in my department in Justice are in daily contact with Garda management, and as Minister for Justice I speak regularly with the Garda Commissioner. Contact between our department and that of Garda Síochána includes any consultation on any measures the Government is considering to protect public health and how such measures will be put into operation. The Government's aim in taking this very serious step to ensure we, as far as possible, avoid the possibility of COVID-19 being re-imported into Ireland through different variants while we are in the process of bringing our own numbers down and implementing our vaccination programme. This would of course undermine the many sacrifices that people in the country have made to protect the most vulnerable in our society. This is a very important protection. However, as I've mentioned, it's really important that we ensure that our legislative approach reflects the balance between the protection of public health and the constitutional freedoms which all legislation must respect. I believe that this bill does so, and I believe that the measures will only remain in place for as long as public health the situation requires us. Again, just to conclude, Cathaoirleach, I do acknowledge, and we all acknowledge, that people across this country have made huge sacrifices in the last year with lives and businesses put on hold. But as the Taoiseach said this week, the end is in sight if we stick with it just that little bit longer. I again want to thank the Minister for Health and his team for the huge amount of work that has been done on this legislation, and I would urge all deputies to support the bill. Thank you.